So this is a show that at one point I wanted to spend in October, one year, doing every single episode of, basically throughout the month, do a review of every episode. But then I realized that's a lot of fucking work, and I don't mean like me being lazy. That's a lot of fucking work. I mean that's a lot of fucking work in terms of like it being quite possibly too much for me to handle because it'd require me to make a video pretty much every single day. And I'm like, nah, that seems like a bit much. Not to mention, if I want to do any of my normal videos on top of that, it'd just be a mess. So when I got this Patreon request from Marwan Abanora, um, I felt a bit more inclined to take it and just review individual episodes as I saw fit later down the line. So, but yeah, let's do that. So what is it that makes this show in particular such a cult classic? Well, as a member of that particular cult, I can tell you why I enjoy it, but that doesn't really say why other people are fans of it to this day. But I can't exactly read mine, so I can just tell you what I think. First, I want to go over the actual premise of the show. It's actually a pretty basic idea when you break it down. You have an alien invader trying to fit in with human society. Now, obviously going this route kind of means you can do whatever the fuck you want, but they went a little bit further than that. I'd like to note that the way that this show goes about having a timeless feel that people really gravitate towards is somewhat similar to what Regular Show did. See, what Regular Show did was they took a very 2000s type of aesthetic and added elements of the 80s to it. And what this show did was it took very much the aesthetic that was much more common in 1999. You look at the way Dib dresses, you can't help but think of Neo from The Matrix or some shit. But it also added sort of the sensibility that was more of a 50s B-movie type of deal. That's certainly the vibe I get at the very least. And again, what this ends up doing is creating this mesh of different points in time that allows it to be presented more timelessly. It also does help that this show certainly has a sense of humor. At the very least, it pretends to have a sense of humor about itself. Basically, it's not that it doesn't take itself seriously. It's just that it does take itself seriously, but also at the same time, it's fully aware of how ridiculous it can be to someone who is observing that process. Well, it doesn't make any sense, but fuck it. Before I get too deep on who all the characters are, I'd like to know the dynamic between the characters that the show presents. Because it's something I found interesting. You see, your main characters, Zim and Dib, they very much have this overt rivalry going on, and I'll get to that in a little bit, but I think before that I want to note something that I in particular found interesting when sort of re-examining the show. The characters around them don't really seem to care about that. But that apathy tends to display in different ways. Gaz and Gur are two very good examples of that sort of contrast between the way people display that they don't care. But I'll get to that in a moment. It's worth noting, though, that many of the other characters have their own little obsessions to deal with. Thus, that's part of the reason that they don't notice Zim and Dib's obsessions, is because almost everyone in the show is kind of self-absorbed. So the thing about Dib and Zim is that both of them are basically trying to kill each other. And that's really what they're obsessed with, one another. And there's actually an interesting thing about the dichotomy of this as well. See, Zim sees Dib as a threat to his plans for world domination, which, by the way, Zim only thinks are supported by his home world. They actually aren't. They just wanted Zim out of his hair. It's kind of a funny little dichotomy with that, too, with like Zim communicating with the tallest, and the tallest not really caring about what he's doing because they just wanted him to go away. Dib, on the other hand, there's an impression that he sees Zim as some sort of conquest, as it were. You see, yes, Dib is very aware of Zim's intentions. That much is true, but based on his obsession with the supernatural, I get the impression that there's really nothing heroic behind Dib's intentions. And based on, again, the way he communicates, it's not really about saving the world. It's about him being proven right. Whereas Zim, you can honestly say he's just following what he thinks are his orders. It's very interesting to note sort of the complexities of what these characters might be thinking. But enough about that. Let's talk about their sidekicks, sort of. So Dib has Gaz, his sister, who doesn't really give a shit about any of this. And although it's kind of unclear whether she thinks Zim is a normal human or not, most of the time it's kind of implied that she does, so I'm just going to go with that interpretation. It's very possible that she doesn't, and we may find out in the future that she doesn't, but that's beside the point. Gaz has her own little obsession, and she tends to not really care about what Dib's doing. Big shocker for any character in the series, but she tends to kind of want Dib to just shut up most of the time and let her play her video game, and that's her obsession, her video game. I remember one time that she chose to help Dib because she thought he was playing a video game that she knew well, and she was giving him tips. That was the only reason she helped in that situation. She's also threatened to kill someone over a game console, so, she's a real high-class human being. On the other side of the coin, you have Gur, who is a defective combat robot? I want to say combat robot. He's a robot that's defective. And it's not that Gur doesn't care about what Zim's doing. There's actually another character that sort of serves a bit of an interesting role. And it's not that Gur doesn't care about what Zim's doing. See, the interesting thing about Gur is that he's actually a well-written, stupid character. Yeah, you could actually write those well. Who would have thought? Basically, the way Gur works is that, yeah, he's stupid, but here's what makes him a little bit more well-written. Number one, he's consistently stupid unless he gets reprogrammed or fixed in a couple of instances where he's functioning the way he's supposed to. Thus, he's able to be more competent and, in fact, go against Zim at that point when he is that super competent. So, there's that. The stupidity kind of keeps him on Zim's side. That's a bit unusual. But another thing about Gur is that there are reasons that the stupidity doesn't really get in the way of things. Number one, most of the time, Gur isn't really the cause of Zim's problems. Most of the time, the cause of Zim's problems is either just a circumstance that happens to exist on Earth, or, well, Zim himself, or even Dib, who is a character we can take much more seriously when he causes problems, even if it's out of his own stupidity. The second thing about Gur is that he's used as a comic relief character, not as, the main support for our protagonist, although he is the main support for our protagonist. Part of the point of the show, this is part of why Gur works. Part of the point of the show is that Zim doesn't really have any good help. That is kind of part of the point of the premise, because Zim is sent here to as a punishment, basically, and he's not supposed to actually succeed. And that's the motivation of the tallest. That's not me saying the point of the show is that he's not supposed to succeed, although it kind of is. But it certainly helps that Gur is a loony, cartoon-esque character in a world that seems to pride itself on its twisted sense of humor. That's another thing about Invader Zim. Its tendency towards dark comedy. And the thing about dark comedy is that it tends to create loyalty in those who enjoy it when it's done well. And it's done well here. Now, of course, this isn't for the faint of heart, but it does play more on that 50s B-movie thing. I think the fact that it goes that far back with the way that it portrays things, yeah, that definitely gives it a bit of an advantage when it comes to being able to use that dark comedy, but like I said, it's not for the faint of heart. And now we get to the reason why it wasn't on air for longer than it was, despite its popularity. I'll be honest, if Invader Zim had been made in, say, the 2010s, it would not have gotten away with half the stuff that it did. But there was one more thing that helped it get away with as much as it did, even when it was made. You see, it's very much a status quo is God type of show, and they take that a bit to the extreme. Most episodes end with some character, some named character, suffering some form of ill fate, and everything just being fine the next time you see him. Probably the best example of this from the show is an episode where, like, I think Dib injects like baloney DNA. No, Zim injects baloney DNA into Dib. One of them injects it into the other, and then they both end up with it, and so they're trying to find a cure for this before they turn into baloney, and they fail. They just turn into baloney, and that's how the episode ends. They're now baloney, and then next episode they're fine. Another episode has a character, Zim's friend. I can't remember his name, but Zim's friend, and this is a friend that's kind of obsessed with Zim, but Zim is his obsession, but he's not. But he doesn't really care about the whole rivalry with Div. He just wants to be Zim's friend. And what ends up happening is that he gets his mind switched with a squirrel, and at another point he gets his eyes removed and replaced with like robot eyes. And he's always fine later on. So yeah, status quo, definitely God in this show. To be quite frank about it, given the nature of Invader Zim, it wasn't going to stay on Nickelodeon for all that long. Because despite all the things that I just talked about that made this show palatable and, dare I say, even kid-friendly to a certain extent, yeah, there were a lot of crackdowns going on in children's television at this time, so it was really no surprise that they weren't going to be able to keep marketing this show effectively for very long. And what really did not help was the fact that a murderer claimed to be inspired by a particular episode of this show that I might review individually at one point, because it seems like one that would be interesting to look at. And yeah, kind of made it impossible to market the show. So it's no wonder that it ended up going by the wayside. You know what? I was originally at this point going to talk about how the show's not dead because they still got comics going on, and they've had comics going on for a long time. But you know what? Nickelodeon aired a little teaser with new voice acting from the voice actor who originally played Zim, indicating that Invader Zim was returning to television. I don't know if these are new episodes or they're just airing reruns based on the fact that, again, it's new voice acting. I'm inclined to believe that there are new episodes. Hopefully, Jonan Vasquez is involved in this, if that's what they're doing. But either way, just goes to show, no matter how much they try to keep our boy Zim down, he's always going to have a way to be a thorn in the side of those disgusting humans. Wait a minute, aren't I one of those? Pretty sure I'm one of those.